Welcome, folks.
Good evening.
Good to see you all in this new year.
Yes. Hi. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and Happy New Year. It's our first meeting in 2022, and we haven't seen you for about a month. I think it's about maybe just a little bit over a month we haven't seen you. And I hope everything is okay with you, because it's been an interesting month. Another variant is going through the country, another COVID variant, but from what I hear, Omicron seems to be maybe the thing which we were waiting for. So fingers crossed, I keep my fingers crossed that maybe Omicron will turn out to be more of a friend than a foe, but I hope you're all okay. I'll just remind you, my name is Julia. I'm one of the directors of SDS seminars, and these events are organized for you by SDS seminars. We are a UK-based company, but we try to invite presenters from both from the UK and from outside our borders, and very happy to welcome participants and viewers on YouTube, also both from the UK and from other countries. So as always, I will be very grateful if you start typing and let us know a little bit about yourself. We've noticed, Paul and I, when we were waiting for you to when you were all in the waiting room, we've noticed lots of new names. Well, at least not familiar to us names. Maybe you were happening to be on the second screen in the past, but it would be really nice to know whether you've been at SDS Thursdays before, or whether it's your first event, and whether you've been to any of SDS other training courses, or it is your just very first meeting with us, very first encounter. It will be lovely. And I know that your fellow participants always read messages in the chat as well, and it's a nice sense of community to know where people are coming from and what settings they're working in. And yes, do let us know how was your Christmas, and whether you're all right, and whether you've already had an encounter with Omicron, or you're okay. So anything you find appropriate would be really nice. And while we are still admitting people, I, as always, want to share some news with you and what we are planning for 2022. So I'll very quickly share my screen with you, and we can discuss these things. Let's start from the home screen as always. And first of all, I'll just let you know how you can find the timetable for SDS Thursdays. So you go on the home screen, the very screen where you signed up for this event, as you can see here on the blue background. And then you go underneath it, there's an item called news. And usually somewhere very high in the news, you will see SDS Free Thursdays calendar. So this one is for 2022. And we are starting today with Paul Grantham on overcoming doubt. And then we are missing 1 week and meeting again in 2 weeks' time on the 27th. And again, Paul is taking us on the ride, on that ride. And we will be talking about jealousy and resentfulness. So I think they are fascinating topics, and I'm looking forward to that one. And on the 3rd of February, we will be talking with Naomi Barrow about one of the modules of adolescence certificate on substance use, alcohol, cigarettes, and street drugs. So that's a very topical issue. And on the 10th of February, I would really recommend you to make a note of that. We have Deanne Jade the founder of the National Center for Eating Disorders, and those who have been on one of her Thursdays last year will agree with me that her Thursday was absolutely amazing. The amount of information she managed to pack in that evening and how informed she is and widely read on the topic. So Diane is going to do 3 modules for us in our adolescence certificate, all 3 related to eating disorders, obesity, body image issues. And she will be talking about them for free at SDS Thursday on the 10th of February. So I highly recommend you to come, and I highly recommend you to have a look at her modules on our website and book them. Then there'll be Paul on Socratic questioning, and then a new course with Professor Andrew Reeves on supervising risk, challenges of supervising risk in counseling and psychotherapy. Andrew is running a 3-part, it's like 1 day, but in 3 parts, 2 hours blocks, event on suicide for us starting on the 25th of January. Again, very, very highly, I recommend you to attend that. And for people who have done supervision training with us, this particular event will be particularly of interest. So this is how you find the timetable for SDS Thursdays. So, and if you want to see our courses, you click all courses, go to calendar view, and you see what is coming up. Okay, so tomorrow, if you've missed it and haven't booked the course yet, you still have time to book Trauma Following Sexual Assault. This course will be presented by Dr. Andrew Beck, president of BABCP, Behavioral and Cognitive Therapists Association, and you really, really want to attend it because Andrew is an amazing presenter. He is very informed. He actually has a 2-day course on this topic, which he had to condense for us into a 2-hour event. So please don't miss it's tomorrow, 14th of January, between midday and 2 o'clock UK time. And then on the 21st of January, Paul will be running 2 hours event again on overcoming doubt. It is part of our certificate on working with non-diagnostic categories. And what I wanted to mention to you is that at the moment, until tonight, until midnight tonight, you still can book it at super early bird discount at £60 plus VAT. So don't miss that opportunity. From tomorrow, the price goes up. So that's the topic which we are going to talk about tonight. And I don't know how you feel about it. In my personal experience, COVID has made me considerably more doubtful about almost any decision I make. The decisions which didn't take any effort at all in the past, now I just can't make decision. I mean, for example, I have this ticket which was rearranged from 2020 to 2021 and now to 2022. It's a theatre ticket to see ballet at Sadler's Wells. I really wanted to see it, but my friend already pulled out saying, I'm not confident about going to the theatre, and I still can't make a decision whether to go, whether not go. And I hope that tonight's session maybe will help me to make that particular decision. And it's a tiny thing which never took me any effort in the past to make a decision about going to a theatre. So, and I'm sure you can probably come up with lots of examples of similar doubts, whether to even go to the shop. We are in doubt all the time. So I think that's enough of me for tonight, and I'm very happy to introduce my co-director and the founder of SDS Seminars, Professor Paul Grantham, who will speak on the topic today. Paul, please.
Thanks very much, Julia, and welcome everybody here this evening. I find myself sitting here with a certain degree of mild amusement about what Julia was saying about the delay in the use of a ticket for an event that's been postponed, because although we actually live together, I'm in exactly the same position about an event on Saturday, which I didn't even realize had been postponed until earlier this week. I thought it had been cancelled, and then I discovered it had been postponed. So I'm just wondering about whether I'm going to go to that. So maybe that's just one of the effects of COVID and the pandemic and lockdown, that you can live with people now and not necessarily know what's facing them on a daily basis. But yeah, you're not alone on that, Julia. You're not alone. Welcome, folks. Welcome to obviously this sort of brief introduction to the whole issue of overcoming doubt, which is obviously a sort of intro and a precursor to the main training that is going to be occurring next week. I think it's next week, isn't it? Yes, next week. To give you some sort of background on it, to give you some idea about what I would see as being the main issues that are actually around with this, and to, I guess as well, to give you a few pointers about, you know, how to actually approach this particular concern, and also obviously I hope stimulate your interest to sign up for the main event next week. So what I'll just do is to share my screen, so we can, that should be it, and hopefully you can see that. Okay. When I was sort of putting this together, I found that for me there was a certain irony in it, because I'm sure that many of you who have done training with me before will know that, generally speaking, I'm quite a big fan of doubt. Actually, I broadly speaking, I think it's the lack of doubt about certain negative thoughts that frequently creates difficulties for people, in fact, and that actually I think probably the main thrust of practically all cognitive therapy strategies is to, putting it very crudely, is to encourage people to selectively attend to things that they normally selectively ignore, and as a result of that, to become more doubtful about their negative thinking. So I have a natural default position, really, of seeing doubt as being something that's quite constructive. It encourages moderation. You know, it helps people to have a balance, I think, in many ways in their life. But having said that, you know, equally, I'm sure all of us can think of instances of clients that we work with where doubt is a problem for them. And I thought a sort of useful starting point with this was for me to just sit down and put together some of the things that I've sort of come across fairly recently from clients, in terms of, you know, the things which they say to me, which are an expression of doubt. Now, this is a very broad range of things. I guess to varying degrees, you will be, they won't be strange to you. You'll probably recognize these either in the clients that you work with, or alternatively, maybe in yourself or in friends and family. So this is just a slightly random list that came to mind when I was reflecting on clients that I actually work with. So how do I know I'll be making the right decision to accept this new job? This was obviously with a client who is thinking about changing their work situation and wasn't sure whether they shouldn't. Thought, you know, I'm going to jump out of this job, which I don't particularly like, but am I going to jump into something that's going to be even worse? So that's that sense of doubt about that. I've got a couple of relationship examples here, romantic relationships examples, which I again have cropped up. These two examples actually come from two people who are to some extent at different ends of the age spectrum. So in the first one, I don't know if that girl I fancy really enjoyed talking to me or not. That actually came from a teenager. maybe that's not surprising, but they were racked with guilt about whether or not to do anything further with this particular person that they fancied. And then we've got somebody else here who has got a history of broken relationships, and which have really affected their confidence in terms of their ability to attach. And, you know, they raise that question with me, you know, how could I know it's safe to fall in love again? You know, I might not just get hurt, but I might be hurt even more than I've been hurt previously. And how can I be certain about the fact that that's not going to happen? After what's happened, I don't feel I know who I am anymore. This came from somebody who had experienced quite a major but one episode trauma. And interestingly enough, for them, the biggest effect of the trauma was it disturbed their sense of certainty regarding their own identity. Am I doing enough to help my elderly mother? Again, a client in their 50s who had a frail parent. They felt very guilty about, you know, whether they were doing enough or not, or you know, can I do anything more? I'm not sure. And then we've got a couple of health examples here. We've got one appropriately enough relating to COVID. Is it safe to go out and socialize during COVID? And we've got another one here, which is a sort of health anxiety one. Is this a lump I can feel? And also, if it is a lump I can feel, might that be cancer? I'm not sure. And that's causing me a great deal of worry. I'm not sure whether someone might break into my house or not. This is somebody who might probably best described as a chronic worrier, has some OCD characteristics as well, but primarily a chronic worrier. And let's just say, what if my husband won't forgive me for what I've done? So this is somebody who has had basically been sexually unfaithful, and they were caught up in a dilemma about whether or not to share this with their spouse, and you know, what is the right thing to do here? How do I know what effect it will have, and so on and so forth. So I hope these will look pretty familiar to you. By the way, incidentally, if anything crosses your mind at all during this presentation, or questions come to you, please pop them into the chat box. You know, I'll attempt to pick up stuff during or at the end of the presentation when we have a Q&A section at the end. Yeah, so what we've got here are all statements that reflect doubt. I think what's quite interesting about them, however, in many ways, is that they are actually in many ways quite different from each other. And you know, what it is that the individual is expressing doubt about is something which I think is really, really important to ascertain before you move any further on it. So let me just expand a little bit. I won't go through all of these, but let me just expand a little bit on what I mean by that. What I would suggest is that whenever somebody is expressing a doubt in this particular way, what is underlying this is a particular belief. And it's going to be crucial in terms of working with that and helping the individual concerned to get greater clarity about what that belief is. So if we take, for example, how can I know if it's safe to fall in love again? There's a number of associated beliefs with this. I don't know necessarily with any particular client which of these apply, but they are important to explore with the client and to elicit from the client. There is, for example, I think, the possible assumption that it would be desirable to fall in love again. And that's got to be worth exploring. There's also, I think, within this, the idea, I think, possibly for the person, that they have a belief that they need to be certain that they will be safe if they allow themselves to fall in love again. So that's just one particular example. But if I can take another one, how do I know I'll be making the right decision to accept this job? My concern is that I believe that I need to know that this job is going to be very good before I actually get into it. How do I know what a bad decision would actually look like to accept this job? If we look at, for example, the issue relating to, is it safe to go out and socialize during COVID? I think there's a basic underlying belief there that actually socializing with other people during the pandemic is intrinsically dangerous. And that if we were to ask people, what do you mean by dangerous? They would probably say that I stand a chance of getting seriously ill and of dying. And that then, I would suggest, becomes the belief that one should be thinking about working with. So what I just want to just sort of tease out from this and encourage you to take away really from, or one of the things to take away from this evening, is that when an individual expresses doubt, what is the underlying belief that the individual holds? And then we can look at it together. We can look at it together and examine it. Now, although these are different types of doubt, they actually all have one particular thing in common. And I think it's a very important thing to, in a way, to zero in on when we're working with clients who express this as a problem, which is, I don't know if I can be sure. In other words, when individuals are dealing with or grappling with feelings of doubt, what they're actually grappling with is the issue of uncertainty. Now, this is sort of, what this uncertainty is, as I said, will be variable. For the person who has, experienced the trauma and they say, I don't know if I know who I am anymore. This is about the fact that they feel uncertain about a pre-identified identity that they had for themselves. I thought I was such and such a person, but now I'm not so sure, for instance. So the whole thing that is central to all problems with doubt is the question of uncertainty. Now, at that level, it's straightforward, but it's beyond that where things start getting complicated, because there are certain doubts that can be expressed where you can tackle them in one particular way with the client. And there are other doubts which are expressed which require quite a radically different approach to them. So what I wanted to do was to just share with you, first of all, probably a couple of the more straightforward ways of dealing with doubt that's expressed by clients, and then say a little bit about the issues that need to be looked at and worked with when we're dealing with, I guess, if I'm really honest with you, people who experience quite chronic or all-pervasive doubt about things. In other words, it's not a one-off, but it's something that seems to ripple out between them. So let's start off. So I'm a great believer, as many of you will know, we're dealing with low-hanging fruit first of all. So it's always worth looking at what is easiest and straightforward, or more straightforward at least, to potentially deal with before we start getting into things which are more complicated. So before we do that, let's just, this may be self-evident, but let me just touch base with you on why doubt is a problem for people. Maybe we just assume it is, but having said the fact earlier on that I'm quite a big fan of it, it's worth, I think, just touching base on how it can be a problem for people. Obviously, it's distressing. There are many of us who would like, very understandably, to have a sense of certainty about all sorts of things. And that then becomes very distressing when we don't have that certainty. And one of the reasons why certainty, by the way, is so important to us is it enables us to make sense of and to predict the world. If I feel sure about things, if I feel sure about who I am, if I feel sure that the job I've applied for is going to be a good job, and so on and so forth. That helps me to take action. It helps me to have in my head some rules that I feel confident about following, and feel confident about my behavior. But when I have doubt, it takes that away, and it makes it much more difficult to act, which is a key point I want to come on to in a minute. Secondly, and I think this is a really key point, which I'm sure many of you with a CBT background will be familiar with, but which I think is worth just highlighting, is that if people are consumed by doubt, it tends to lead to a lot of time-consuming and rather emotionally exhausting strategies to manage it. And I know that for many of you, you will immediately think to yourself with a CBT background, you'll think safety behaviors. And indeed, we get a lot of safety behaviors being expressed by people who have quite extensive issues regarding doubt. If you're not familiar with the concept of safety behaviors, apart from me, of course, encouraging you to sign up to one of our introductory CBT courses, can I just say that briefly, safety behaviors are strategies that individuals use to prevent the worst from happening, but which actually, unfortunately, make the problem even worse. So with things like where there's a lot of doubt around, constant reassurance seeking, which incidentally is never enough. So you always have to come back for more. A lot of double checking. Obviously, this is very common with OCD problems, but it crops up in other contexts as well. Procrastination, obviously a favorite topic of mine, is also one where people will engage in doing something to prevent the worst from happening. The third thing that occurs, which is a real problem, I think, with doubt, and which we're going to spend, I see this as being actually quite important, really, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on when we're looking at this in the main training, is it leads to cognitive and behavioral freeze. Now, basically, we know, don't we, that when individuals are very highly aroused, when they're very anxious, for example, they tend to find that their thinking becomes very rigid and they become quite tunnel visioned. But we also know that when people are overwhelmed by doubt, they equally become unable to think. So, the ability to problem solve, the ability to think about things creatively in a way which might solve things or be helpful in terms of moving things forward is substantially impaired when individuals are plagued by doubt. And as a result of that, you also get a lot of behavioral freeze. So, I can think immediately of a client where, to begin with, almost anything that you would say to her, she would respond by simply saying no. Whatever it actually was, because when you are feeling very, very uncertain, you're very wary about taking any action on anything, really. Now, one of the great difficulties with cognitive and behavioral freeze is it feeds on itself. In other words, the less you think creatively, the more you behave passively and freeze on the spot, the less able you are to think flexibly, the less able you are to actually do things. And there are some particular ideas that I'll be going through next week in the main course about being able to address this and help people to get out of it. And the other, the problem with points 2 and 3 is that, people end up avoiding having fun and doing good flourishing things in their life. They get so caught up with basically self-protection that, they miss out on life as a result. And the key thing that I always want to emphasize with both safety behaviors and also with cognitive and behavioral freeze is they don't work. They don't work. People use them to keep safe, but actually people don't end up feeling safe when they actually use them. Indeed, we've got a lot of evidence, particularly with safety behaviors, that individuals actually find their problems get worse the more they engage in these. And of course, you know, other things are happening in life, aren't they? You know, while I'm frozen on the spot, you know, other things are happening around me. So, you know, there's other things that I need to be dealing with. And if I have an incapability of reacting because I'm cognitively and behaviorally frozen, it actually leads me to be more vulnerable to responding to other bad things that might be occurring for me. So I just really wanted to touch on why I think that is important. Now, there are some problems, can I say, where doubt exists, where information seeking can be useful. You know, if the example I took earlier, for instance, of is this a lump that I can actually feel, and is it cancer? I could even say the same thing about the COVID doubt question. These are doubts where there is, and I'll phrase this very carefully, at least a role for information seeking. That actually, it may be that I can create some more certainty by sourcing information which will enable me to make a more informed decision. Now, I'm phrasing this in this particular way because information seeking and what it is that you seek and where you look for it is actually extraordinarily complicated. Let me just give you a few examples and stick with the medical example first of all. There's a whole issue here about whatever the information source is that somebody goes to in order to try and get greater certainty has to be an information source that they see as authoritative and trustworthy. So the first thing to say about that is, what sorts of sources does the individual see as being trustworthy? And to be blunt with you, are they valid or not? If you're wondering about, well, why is that so complicated with something like breast cancer or COVID? Can I just say many individuals will typically rate the authority and convincing nature of information on the basis of the message giver and the values that that message giver holds. So for instance, there's always been lots of examples where, for example, people will go to friends and family for advice on medical issues, rather than going to a qualified medical practitioner. I mean, that's a simple, easy example. But we've got other problems around now with information seeking, and the COVID situation is a great illustration of this, which is that we are bombarded by information. In fact, the problem is not finding information at all. There's loads of it out there. The problem is how do I make a decision about what to trust and what not to trust? So I mention this because there are some issues where doubt occurs, where information seeking can be helpful, but it's not always straightforward, and you need to basically explore with the person what sorts of information are of value to them, and also what their attitude is towards different types of information provider, whether that is their mother, or whether that is a consultant medic, or whether that's somebody on a website that they've actually read. So it's a useful thing to be aware of, and it is to be incorporated potentially in our work, but it's not always totally straightforward. I think that there are a number of sort of other issues of doubt where actually at the end of the day we can use some fairly useful generic CBT techniques. And I think that you know, I don't want to sort of teach you to suck eggs here, but you know, if any of you have got a basic CBT background and you are familiar with the idea of CBT largely working by encouraging people to selectively attend to evidence that they normally tend to selectively ignore, then actually using basic cognitive restructuring, for example, is useful with a number of these particular types of doubts. So if I take this first one, how do I know I'll be making the right decision to accept this new job? There will be supporting evidence for the underlying belief that this new job is a bad move, and that's the underlying negative belief that needs to be addressed. There'll be supporting evidence for that, and there will be non-supporting evidence for that. Now, if the person is in a frozen position in terms of not acting because they have a belief that the new job may be a bad one, what they are tending to do, obviously, is to selectively attend to any evidence that supports that particular idea that the job is bad, and selectively ignoring the other evidence that supports that it's not. So I'm not going to go through some basic cognitive restructuring with you here. Again, for those, many of you will be familiar with this. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, then I would simply suggest that, again, come on one of our introductory CBT courses, and we'll take you through, along with many other things, of course, take you through basic cognitive restructuring. So there are some beliefs where that's actually possible to do. What I would actually say about that, incidentally, and that whole issue about cognitive restructuring, is that it is, I think, most useful when you are talking about a very focused, limited, and boundaried doubt. So that example about a job, for instance, I think is more likely to work well in that particular position when it's that particular focused. I would say, for instance, if we look at the individual who says, I don't know if I know myself any longer, there will be an underlying doubt. There'll be an underlying belief below that doubt. I might need to elicit that from the person, and they might say, I used to think I was very strong, and I don't know if I can believe that any longer. We could actually take that belief, I am a weak person, and we could explore that as well by looking at supporting and non-supporting evidence. And again, for those of you with a CBT background, you'll know that you could use a continuum technique in that particular instance to actually do that. But both of these are, in a strange way, quite specific. They're quite focused doubts. When doubt is much broader than that, when people start doubting their confidence about doing anything, when people have a default position of delay on doing anything, a default sense of saying to themselves, I don't actually know if this is actually correct. They would describe themselves as naturally doubtful. The evidence that we actually have on this is that this approach alone doesn't work at all. Now, that leads us into a whole other area. And I just want to flag up some of the key issues that are around with this that we're going to look in a lot more detail next week, because they all in many ways center on the issue of uncertainty and the person's attitude towards uncertainty. So the first thing I want to start off with is to make, in many ways, a self-evident statement, but it is so self-evident to make that it's often ignored by people, which is that uncertainty is universal. There is no certainty about anything. There are things that are arguably more certain than others, but there are no guarantees. And there are some where, to be honest with you, the questions are almost existential, in the sense that we haven't got a clue. Will I fall in love again? I don't know if I'm going to fall in love again. It's an existential belief. So the first thing to say is that it can be a bit of a rabbit hole to go down with clients to try and basically help them to get rid of uncertainty. There are some very specific things where you can substantially reduce it, but actually uncertainty is universal, you know. But what's interesting about this, by the way, as you and I are all sitting here at the moment, thinking about this, and we are all, can I say, equally affected by uncertainty, I can guarantee that we vary enormously in terms of how aware we are of that, and we vary enormously in terms of how much it influences our thinking, our decision making, how much it influences how we actually feel. So the argument is, with looking at the question of doubt and uncertainty, is it's not uncertainty itself which is a problem. For people who are chronic doubters, if I can use that term, actually the biggest issue is about the person's ability or inability to tolerate uncertainty. And that concept of intolerance of uncertainty, which is called in the literature IU, actually becomes the most central issue with a great deal of doubt problems that people actually have. Now, that intolerance of uncertainty can vary enormously in its specificity. I can think of people that I've worked with who have terrible difficulties tolerating uncertainty at home, but they don't have it at work. I can think of people who have a specific intolerance of uncertainty with regards to where they go on holiday, but can make much, much larger life decisions and where it doesn't seem to affect them. So how widely spread that difficulty with dealing with uncertainty is varies from person to person. And that incidentally has some implications for the work we might do with them. Because not surprisingly, broader based beliefs, which apply more universally to a wide range of circumstances, are generally speaking more tricky to handle. Basically, the other thing that's really interesting about it, because I'll be honest with you, I personally can't relate to this, but quite clearly lots of people do, is that intolerance of uncertainty has a lot to do with seeing ambiguity, novelty, and unpredictability as threats. Now, I say I have difficulties relating to this because a large part of me finds these things stimulating, interesting, and exciting. I don't actually intrinsically, on the whole, I mean, there will be things that crop up, obviously, in my life, but generally speaking, things which are unclear or new, or I don't know exactly which direction they're going to go, engage me. And I'm very, very lucky in that respect. But I also know that a large number of my clients don't have that. You know, even if actually the ambiguity, novelty, and unpredictability is pretty minor, you know, the issue is minor, they immediately perceive it as a threat. And in a strange way, they see all such threats as equal. So they frequently don't distinguish between the potential outcomes of those. They're all seen as potentially equally threatening. And not surprisingly, such individuals tend to orientate towards such things. So they're looking out. This is basic, you know, CBT 101 really, which is, you know, if we start off from a belief that the world is threatening, we selectively attend and look out to the horizon to see if we can spot anything that might be a threat. And we also know from selective attention that the more you look for stuff, the more you're going to find it. So it's a very, I mean, I would say heartbreaking position to be in for many people, that they see their world as being very, very threatening, and that the things which are most threatening to them are the things which are unclear, totally new, or where they just don't know what's going to happen with them. And to make a very obvious point here, COVID has been a great environment in which to feed that particular pre-existing belief. Finally, negative uncertainty beliefs, again, also vary in their specificity, strength, and importance. And the key word I really want to pull out here is strength. I know I've just I said this earlier, but I will repeat it again. I don't think the fundamental issue here is about uncertainty. I think the fundamental issue of what we are trying to help our clients to do when they are feeling confronted by doubt is to encourage them to develop a weaker belief in the threatening nature of ambiguity, novelty, and unpredictability. And through that, it frees them up. Now, I'll take a break there because I know we're at 1:45 and you know, time is running out, particularly if you've got particular questions, folks. But can I just say, we'll obviously be doing a much deeper dive on this next week. And for those of you that haven't signed up yet, I hope to see you there. So I just pass myself over to Julia, I guess, and just double check whether there's any questions that you can see in the chat box at all that we should be.
Hi, Paul, thank you. Can you stop screen sharing? And
yes,
that will make
it easier.
I can. Thank you. Thank you very much for this. I actually wanted to ask you before I go to the questions in the chat box. Can you just briefly tell us what will be happening next Friday on the course? Because you've actually covered a lot of material here. So why would people unmute yourself, please? Thank you. Why people need to come to the course? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. What you've got here this evening is a bit of background. It still leaves the question of what the heck do we do with our clients? And that is what next week's going to be about. It will be a deep dive into strategies that we know work and help, and to also encourage you to be more confident in knowing how to approach doubt issues in particular instances and how they actually express themselves. So the aim is for you in a very condensed, bite-sized, 2-hour training to basically go away with some practical strategies that you can actually use and incorporate into your work. Because I would guess that all of us here basically are in situations where we work with clients who have problems with doubt, really.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've got 3 questions which I've copied here on my screen. The first one was from Carol, and she asks, how does doubt compare to caution?
Right, that's a really good question. Thank you very much. Caution, in my opinion, is an accurate recognition that threat exists in the world. Just as it's not a terribly helpful belief to have to say everything is threatening or everything is potentially threatening, it's equally crazy to have a belief which says the world is totally safe. And so for that particular reason, caution is essential in terms of functioning. The thing I would say that distinguishes the two is that I think personally that caution is selective. So there are certain circumstances where we are more likely to be aware of the possibility of threat, and other circumstances where we're less likely to be. And so I think that it's a more selective thing. I think the other thing I'd probably say is that I think that caution is probably not as intense. So the strength of beliefs that are around the idea of caution about the prospect of threat are not as strongly held. And because they're not as strongly held, they're less likely, if I'm cautious, I'm less likely to be anxious than if I'm actually plagued by doubt about a potential decision. And equally, I'm less likely to freeze behaviorally. I might move more slowly in terms of what I do, but I'm less likely to actually freeze. With doubt, I think that freeze is much more common.
Yes, because we do say proceed cautiously. So you still move, you still move in a particular direction rather than freeze completely. Let me ask another question. This one is from Kate. If as a doubter, you are overly attached to an outcome, how can selectively attending to positive or negative information bring certainty that you crave?
Right. Well, that's a really what's really interesting about that is not the bit about the doubt. It's the other bit about the attachment to the outcome. And in a strange way, what I would say is that lack of certainty becomes more threatening if we have an extremely strong belief that the consequences of not obtaining the outcome that we want would in some way, shape or form be unbearable. So if I could take a romantic example just to illustrate that. If I have, or I've met somebody and I feel very strongly towards them, and it's really important to me that that relationship works out, but I feel very doubtful about whether I know I can trust that person, okay? Which would be an example, I would argue, of what's being looked at here. What I would argue is that actually what would be helpful would be to become slightly more doubtful about the necessity of the outcome that I would desire. So obviously it's desirable to have a successful relationship. But if I actually have an underlying belief that I don't know what that would be because it would vary from person to person, but if this relationship doesn't work out, it will be catastrophic. If this relationship didn't work out, I'd be destroyed. If this relationship didn't work out, then I would be living on my own for the rest of my life and very, very unhappy. It's that strength of belief. Now, I want to make clear here, I'm not saying that that belief should be ditched. All I'm simply saying is that the strength of the belief is what makes the lack of certainty so difficult to tolerate. In other words, and I know this is very easy for me to sit here and say, but really the answer is to become slightly more shoulder shrugging about the outcome. Which I mean, I know there's a host of stuff to be looked at with that, but that's the brief answer. Yeah.
It's very interesting listening to you. It feels to me that almost the cognitive doubt for which you always advocate and which CBT hopefully helps to create almost needs to be a different term, because this is not quite the same doubt we're talking about, isn't it? It's more about decision-making sort of doubt, but cognitive doubt usually is quite helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe the term cognitive moderation might be a better, because I mean, in a sense, the whole thing really, psychological health is really about cognitive moderation.
Yeah, avoiding extremes. Yes. Okay, and this is a question from Ian. Isn't the manifestation of doubt indicative fundamentally of a client's evaluation of risk? Doubt, in my experience, functions to avoid choice, which in itself...
Sorry, can you just repeat that second bit again?
Yeah, so he continues, doubt, in my experience, functions to avoid choice, which in itself is related to the avoidance of loss. I mean, we probably, if you would like more clarification, we probably can ask Ian to unmute himself and if
you're there, Ian, that would probably be helpful.
Ian, is it okay?
I
can see you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I was driving at was the sense that I think clients, it's actually more related to this, how they evaluate risk in relationship to doubt, as opposed to, doubt being a problem in itself. So it's actually more about risk, coming back to the question of, cognitive doubt being maybe quite a positive thing, which I think you were trying to address in the previous response. In a sense, what we're talking about here, I think, is much more, it linking with the client's own ability to tolerate risk. Because most of the examples that you gave, I thought were actually, you could see in it an element of this is risky, there's a risk involved. And the risk always ultimately leads to a sense that there may be loss. I have to make a choice about a job. And the consequence of that may be that I'm worse off. I've suffered a loss, as it were. So it's those elements that I think need to be contended with in our therapeutic work with clients.
No, I wouldn't dispute that. I mean, I would just probably simply say, I mean, I think you frame it slightly differently, but I totally agree with you. Yeah. And in that respect, I guess part of addressing this is exploring what the loss is that someone fears might actually happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, no, I would totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. And I just think sometimes, being able to move the language around a bit, so we're able to, can actually help to free it up a bit.
Yeah,
as well.
no, I think you're quite right. Yeah, thanks. That was a really helpful clarification, actually. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I couldn't spot any more questions because lots of people are actually commenting and saying thank you, which is always very lovely. I just wanted to mention to you, I did put a link to our YouTube channel, and I'll put it up again, because for people who are here for the first time, maybe missed quite a lot of Thursdays, do feel free and go there, absolutely free there, and you can see all the presenters we've had over this almost 2 years, and maybe find the topics which you would like to catch up upon. So do feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you very much, Paul. Paul, believe it or not, expressed doubt today whether he had enough material. He thought he will finish very, very early. No, we're approaching 8 o'clock as always. And thank you very much, Paul, for this presentation. Thank you everyone for coming. I hope to see you on Friday. I'll be working with Paul on this particular course. And once again, we're meeting in 2 weeks' time to talk about jealousy and resentfulness. Take care. You can unmute yourself and say your goodbyes and thanks, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, take care, folks. Look after yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.